Welcome to the Designing Hollywood podcast in association with the John Campea Show. I am your host, Robert Meyer Burnett. Today's episode is sponsored by the Costumes Rental Corporation. Our guest today is a governor of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, has worked on more than 70 films, and has been nominated for 5 Oscars, including for work on Black Panther, Transformers, and Star Trek. He received a BAFTA nomination for his work on Star Trek and a Primetime Emmy nomination for Star Trek Picard. He's worked closely with some of the top directors in film, including Michael Bay, Ryan Coogler, Howard and Patty Jenkins. Earlier this year, you could see his work in Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. He's also just finished work with Chris Pine, who is making his directorial debut with the upcoming film, The Poolman. And he was honored in March by the Cinema Audio Society with its prestigious Career Achievement Award. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Peter J. Devlin to the Designing Hollywood Show. Our conversation already in progress.
The one thing that I find when I interview with a new director, they always tell me about, they don't like to ADR. They want to stress the importance of the dialogue on set. And I've always found that, when you're on set, suddenly sound isn't important anymore to the director. Even though you've had that conversation during the interview, but then it's really important in post-production because, to be honest, when you're on set as a director, you have so many things coming at you, so many different departments, so it's being able to have that trust with the director that understands when you do come to say, we really have an issue if you're going to be shooting 3 cameras here. Is it possible we don't shoot that wide camera because of the physicality of the scene? So, and I find that I've worked with directors over and over that they have that kind of level of confidence when I do talk to them about any adjustments that I don't want to use the word compromise, but can certainly, adjust how they're going to shoot the scene, and they'll take it on board and say, okay, good point. This is a scene where I don't want to have to do ADR, and we'll accommodate the sound department on this one. So, and I mean, you were talking about the different noises and the things that can impact production sound. I can remember on the film Daredevil, which was shot back in 2002 and 3, I think it was, with Ben Affleck and Colin Farrell. We were doing a lot of nights. We were in a rooftop downtown, and there was a cricket that was just making so much noise. Even though you'd think, hey, you're shooting downtown, you're dealing with traffic noise, there was one cricket that we were in the hunt for to try to quieten down that was taking out the dialogue, or on the deck of the Starship Enterprise, which looks so futuristic, but anytime that camera made a dolly move, you got a creak on the floor.
Yeah. Yeah, and this kind of stuff is and it's, and for you guys, everyone on a film set has a different job, and everybody who's on a film set believes their job's the most important because that's the one they're doing. And I can't tell you though how many times a good recordist can save someone's performance, because you're using, sometimes you have booms that have to go a long way, and you have to be, there's things in sets that you have to like move around to get that dialogue. And it's invaluable to have that. I can't stress enough to have a great, because I also edit, so I work in post, and man, there are times when I have missed, like, if only we were able to get that production sound, if only we had it. And when you don't, it's can be soul crushing. So
yeah, I remember when working on Any Given Sunday, Oliver Stone's film, that was probably at that time just such a challenging film for me because the style in which Oliver works in, he used to call it his 3-ring circus, and certainly when we were shooting at the Orange Bowl, we had scenes that were happening on the field in the huddle. We were having scenes that were happening simultaneously on the sidelines with Al Pacino, and then on a separate set with Aaron Eckhart. So there was so much information, so many things going on at one moment, but it was definitely just such a rewarding film to be a part of, and to have worked with that caliber of actors. I mean, you had Charlton Heston, Dennis Quaid, Al Pacino, James Woods, Cameron Diaz. And I remember there was a particular scene where we basically were shooting on film back then, and it was kind of Al Pacino was coming to see Cameron Diaz, and it was one of the kind of longest speeches in the film, 10 minutes long, and it was electric from action to cut. It was one of those moments where the hair stands up in your back of your head. That has happened many times for me in different performances, but just to watch Al Pacino and Cameron together was amazing. So many scenes in that film were just brilliant. You know, the locker room scene.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask you,
Okay.
because the speech Al Pacino gives, one of the great speeches of all time. We fought for every inch. You know
That's right.
what? I have to
He
ask.
says, you know, when you get old in life, things get taken away from you. That's part of life. Life is just a game of inches. So is football, you know. So,
Well,
and Kevin Churkey, I was my boom operator in that, and Mike Schmidt. And, you know, I still, when I see that clip played, I can remember the day. I can remember my crew on that set. And we walked away from that day and we knew that speech, you know, will live on. And it does.
It's one of the great. Now I've got to ask, when they were blocking or rehearsal, and you have to figure out what level you're going to record an Al Pacino speech at. Did you have to ride the inputs and make sure? Because for you, was that a daunting task, recording Al?
Well, the one thing that can strike fear into many sound mixers and sound teams is when they say, hey, we're just going to shoot the rehearsal. So it's not a rehearsal. So you've got to be prepared for the dynamic range. And yeah, Al certainly, by that point in the movie, I knew to be prepared for everything. You got to be quick on the faders there. So, and I don't think we had any distortion or anything like that through the course of that movie, fortunately. And I had a great team with me as well, and a second unit. Sal Totino was our cinematographer on that, and that was his first film. And as a collaborator, Sal was just amazing, because there were times where he did make changes camera-wise to allow us to do what we need to do. And that isn't always the situation, because sometimes, I'm not saying all cinematographers, but they can somewhat be myopic. And I understand that. They're in the heat of battle there. But when you have somebody like on any given Sunday, Sal, who, when you go to him, explain your problem, he'll say, okay, we need to get the sound guys in here. Terrific.
Well, I've got to ask you also, in terms, not just Oliver Stone, but you've worked with Michael Bay, who's known for his bayhem, on set, blows a lot of stuff up. What's it like being a sound mixer on a Michael Bay set? I would imagine, is it dangerous? Do you fear for your life?
When I talk about, when you're reading off the number of films that I've worked on and your life flash before your eyes, I can literally remember my very first day working with Michael and Kevin, my boom man. I was staying at his house through the course of the film. We both came home that day absolutely exhausted, trying to figure out how are we going to get through this for the next 48 days. This was exhausting because he moves at such an accelerated pace. He shoots really fast, and he multiple cameras.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was definitely an enlightening experience. And I remember just Will and Martin, their characters on the first day were much more serious. And it took probably about a week or so for them to find the humor in their characters. So it was kind of fun to watch that development. But I have to say, when Don Simpson and Jerry Bruckheimer came to the set for the first time in '94, I had a flashback to sitting in Belfast watching the movie Top Gun and saying, God, I'd love to work for these guys someday.
Wow. And then that's so great that you actually got to do that. I mean, all the way back to, well, I guess, was Bad Boys the first time? Because that was the first, was that the first time you worked with Michael Bay? I think it
That's
was.
right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's
That was
also
the first time.
so Simpson
And then
Bruckheimer
went
too.
on to do Pearl Harbor, The Island, the
Hmm.
Transformers movies. And
Yeah.
yeah, so it's, I mean, you talk about Bayhem. I mean, Michael has such a really distinct visual style and an appreciation of sound as well. You know, he does he does say sometimes about sound, I don't care, but he does care. At the end of the day, he does, and he does accommodate when he decides to. Not maybe when I want him to accommodate sound, but no, he is somebody that has got his fingerprint over every frame on that film and every sound on that film. So, and his films sound very big. Now, but going back to Bad Boys, yeah, that was fun. And then obviously the sequel was a bigger budget, and
That
I
movie's
can remember
insane too. The second one's
insane.
just
And there's a car carrier sequence where cars getting are flipped off a car carrier. I was there with a little portable recorder because it wasn't scripted, but the Haitians that were on the car carrier were all ad-libbing, so I had to capture that on the day. And Michael is someone who hates looping. He's like, "We'll do it." Just say, "I don't want to loop this." No, absolutely not. So the pressure's on to make sure that every dialogue, every word spoken, makes it into the final edit and into theaters. So, but you know, if I can just take it back to the 80s, as I was sitting watching these films, I was like huge fan of, you know, Star Trek. Star Trek is a film that, you know, the television series, first of all, loved the TV show, and can remember standing in line at the New Vic Theatre in Belfast in 97, in sorry, 1979 to watch the motion picture,
yeah.
coming out going, that wasn't quite what I was expecting. Then seeing Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, thinking that's more like it. And then to be standing on the deck of the Enterprise and to meet Leonard Nimoy, unbelievable,
Yeah,
just terrific.
that's such a great story that you got to meet him. Um, and he has such a distinct voice as well, which is great. Now I've got to ask you, you've worked on a lot of Marvel movies. Actually, you've worked on DC movies too for Patty Jenkins, Wonder Woman. But you know, you worked on Iron Man 3 with Shane Black, and then you went on and did The Nice Guys. But what's it like with Marvel, with all the NDAs and all the secrecy? Are you a fan? First of all, did you grow up a fan of comic books, and did you have the same feeling as well when you stepped on your first Marvel set that, oh my God, I'm working on a Marvel movie?
Yes, I used to pick Marvel comics and DC as well
Yeah,
in Belfast. No, but I wasn't a huge collector. But you know, I kind of got into the superhero world when I did the television series Superboy back
right.
in 1988. So it's like it's now 2023, and I'm about to start another Marvel show, which obviously NDA can't say what that is.
Right.
So, but that's later in June or so. So, but yeah, I seem to, whether it's robots, outer space, people in capes. It's a kind
Right.
of running a theme here in the on the recordings that I've made over the last 30 years or so.
Well, let me ask you this: the obviously you went back all the way to the Jazz Singer, the first sound film. With digital technology increasing all the time, has your job changed over the last 30 years drastically, or is it just using newer tools, or is it essentially the same?
I think the evolution of technology has definitely made our job easier in terms of being able to offer more to post production. So when I think of, you know, those early days in Hollywood where they were experimenting, and because of the technology changes, it then created difficult situations in set, whether it be the fact that once sound came along, suddenly cameras had to be enclosed in booths. Then they had to figure out, how do we make cameras quieter to be able to move them along. When we were recording back, it was a Vitaphone system that was
Yeah.
recording onto records, and now we've evolved from, you know, when I started, back in the 80s, we were recording to single track quarter inch on location, which then evolved into digital audio 16-bit DAT tapes.
Yep.
Which was a medium that was more really a consumer product, but adapted to work in film. And then we went into the digital recorders from 4-track recorders, which I've used with Saxcom, and then into now 24 tracks. So it has allowed us to be able to, as I say, give more choices to post-production, which is what our aim is. We're trying to give as clean a dialogue as possible so that they can manipulate it and do as much as possible in post-production. And for the CAS, I did a series of podcasts with retired production mixers. And the one question I would put to them was, knowing that the technology that there's around today, would you have liked to have had that back in, like, I was talking to Charlie Wilborn, who did The Godfather Part 2. I was talking to David McMillan, who's retired now, who did The Right Stuff and won the Academy Award for The Right Stuff and Apollo 13 and Speed. Bill Kaplan, who did Back to the Future and has been Robert Zemeckis' partner. And they all came up with the same thing. Look, we didn't know about any future technology. We just had to make it work with what we had at the time. So, looking forward, I don't know what it's going to be like in 10 years' time. I just know that in the course of the 30 years that I've been doing feature recording, all the tools that have come out have certainly made it better for me and made it more, given the post-production folks much more choices to be able to create and build on what I do on set and see it through the finals, those frames on the big screen in front of an audience. I'm hoping that kind of answers the question in terms of technology.
No, it's a great answer. And I've always thought that we've seen it evolve, certainly in post-production. Editorial technology has revolutionized the art of editing. I mean, the computer technology that we've been able to rely on. And I know that digital recording, microphones, everything has become even better. And like you said, it's all in the service of making sure that those soundtracks that you're recording get into post-production. They've got the best sound possible. It's funny, you've been on some movies that, like, I loved Kong Skull Island. But I would ask, like, if you're recording something that's a more comedic, and when actors have a tendency to start, say, ad-libbing, is that more difficult for you, having to, like, wonder what they're going to do on the fly if you haven't seen something? You talked about the Haitians in the Transformers or in the Bad Boys movies, like I guess Bad Boys 2. If you have that, is it hard for you to run and gun like that? Would you prefer not to do it?
Well, I haven't done any Judd Apatow movies, but I know people that have. And that's a very kind of evolving set with actors ad-libbing, where every actor has their own microphone. I know that one of the toughest jobs I did was called The Guilt Trip with Barbara Streisand and Seth Rogen. And there's quite a bit of ad-libbing on that, but it was more to do with the kind of lighting configurations that I had to deal with. But that could kind of give me an insight into the world of ad-libbing. But now, because of the technology and because of the tools that we have, we're basically able to give more actors microphones, and that allows them to kind of go in and do select cuts performance-wise, and also clean up if there are any issues with radio microphones getting thumped. Because you find a lot of actors, and I'll just demonstrate here, is they love to do that if they're and that will take out a line of dialogue very easily.
Yeah.
And just touching on superhero suits, that's another thing that those can be, that takes preparation with the costume designer to find ways in which to be able to integrate microphones into costumes. So it is an art in itself, and the people that I've worked with that have worked as utilities or second assistant sounds or boom operators, there's a skill level that they must have, and they do have, to be able to go to set every day and identify a costume and say, okay, I know that's going to work if we put that mic there. And for Wakanda Forever, I sat down with Ruth Carter.
Ruth Carter, yeah. Who's been on the show
about
before.
2 months. I know, that's right. And Ruth went through all the wardrobe for the show to kind of work with me to figure out a plan to get those mics there because, excuse me, there are some wardrobes that can basically compromise the quality of your sound. And the first thing I do is, as I say, I go through that script and I kind of figure out which actors I'm going to be dealing with, find out who the costume designer is, and start working at an early stage how to kind of figure out I don't want to say problem, but figure out what lies ahead and how we can kind of integrate the microphones into those costumes. The quality of sound will always be severe when you've got a mic over somebody's head, which is, it's a very, when you think not a lot has changed since the advent of that kind of first recording on the jazz singer having a microphone over somebody's head. We still need to do it. And recently I saw, there was a still picture of, I think it was Tom Cruise in one of the Mission Impossible movies, and there was a boom pole and a microphone. And the comment was, what is that? Hadn't they figured out a new technology where you don't have a microphone over an actor? Well, fortunately, we do. And that microphone works really well and will continue to do so. So I think that, to me, I still amazes me that, if you strip away just all the mechanics of filmmaking, it all comes down to performance, a camera, and a microphone above an actor.
Yeah, I mean, it really does, and that's what you're getting, and it really hasn't changed much. And you've gone from, you've worked on more independent stuff and the biggest of the big budget movies, but your job pretty much stays the same, doesn't it? No matter what the budget of the film is.
Whatever the budget is, I worked with Chris Pine on his directorial debut, Poolman, and they used practical locations there because they didn't have the money to build sets. Right. And you'll find that on those smaller films that's the way you have to go, and you'll be have to deal with those practical locations and everything that comes with that. I did a movie with Rodrigo Garcia called Last Days in the Desert, and we were shooting down in Borrego Springs, and Chivo Emmanuel Abeski was the cinematographer on it, and we were up at sunrise out into the desert, and you'd think it would be the most quiet environment, but sadly we had the Canadian military Air Force team doing practice jumps above us, parachuting. So it was miles away, and and Last Days in the Desert is supposed to take place 2,000 years ago, and all I can hear is prop planes above us, and yeah. And then the other thing is, sometimes if you're shooting at an airport, one of the comments I get is, what do you want us to do? We're shooting at an airport. That you just have to live with that soundtrack. But no, those are the things that, you don't want to get on the soundtrack because that will take out performance.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes you'll get lucky, though. I've been very lucky at airports, touch wood.
Well, one of the things I like about what you guys do too is of all the jobs on the set, you're probably closest in terms of the performance of the actor because you're hearing it all. And I've found sometimes that going back and asking the sound mixer what they thought in terms of performance, sometimes even that can be, I don't know if anybody does that with you, but what they've said, and has anyone ever, do directors ever come and ask, or do actors say, I'm sure, well, actors say it all the time, how was that? But do you ever get consulted about which performance of the 10 you just...
Surprisingly, Oliver Stone used to talk about performance to me after, especially in Al Pacino's scene as Tony D'Amato. Just little moments, asked me what I thought. Michael Bay is another one that has talked to me about performance. Patty Jenkins, so people that you kind of have a relationship with, and then there's some directors that just they're on a mission, they've got to go, and
right.
As soon as they take those headphones on, they're on the set. So, but there was, I really enjoyed working with Bob Rafelson. I did a film called Blood and Wine.
Blood and Wine, yeah.
Which was kind of a noir film there, although it was set in the 90s, not the 40s or 50s. But Tom Siegel was the cinematographer on it. Had a very distinctive look to it, and it was fun to watch the relationship between Bob Rafelson and Jack Nicholson, because they had a friendship and a partnership dating back to, I think, the Monkees, which they both produced back in the 60s. But there were scenes in that film that were just, you could feel the tension in the room with the actors. I mean, not that it was the actors personally,
Right.
but performance-wise, with Michael Caine and Jack Nicholson, or Judy Davis and Jack Nicholson. And those are things that, as a production mixer, you feel very fortunate to be a part of. And that's what has always interested me, to be able to kind of be on set to record those moments. And then, the post-production, the re-recording mixers, they deal with other issues
Right.
in that process that I may not well be aware of. So, but I've had post-production folks come out and spend time with me on set, and it gives them kind of a different perspective on what our job is and what we have to do to get what they need. And I think that's important to do. But I can think of so many different wonderful performances. I did a movie, it was called Skeleton Key, and with Kate Hudson and Jenna Rollins and John Hurt. And it's a very underrated kind of horror movie. It's not really even a horror movie. It is a suspenseful movie. And that was a great film to be a part of. And I was mentioning the Nice Guys there with Russell Crowe.
And how much fun
Ryan
was
Gosling.
that?
That was fun. That was and Russell comes from a perspective of, he's very specific. He knows what he wants to, because has directed as well. So Philippe Rousselot was our cinematographer, and then Shane Black. It was a really fabulous mix of folks there. And when you're shooting it, you're never quite sure, is the humor going too far here? There's a scene where Russell Crowe breaks the arm of Ryan Gosling, and he lets out this horrific scream, which I can still hear it today. But watching those two bounce off each other, that's the joy of being of a production mixer, of being of a production team. And then there are films that, Gone in 60 Seconds, watching Nick Cage at work. That was fun to do. I did 2 films with him.
Yeah.
Two very distinctive characters with Gone in 60 Seconds, and then the National Treasure movies.
Yep. Yeah.
So, and then with on the Black Panther film, working with Chadwick Boseman, he was just such a unique and wonderful actor who I never saw him as anyone but T'Challa, because he stayed in character. And there are actors that stay in character, and he stayed in character until the very end, when he handed off his microphone to us, and then he was Chadwick. And on the film Frost Nixon, Frank Langella stayed in character as Mr. President the whole movie. When we'd go in to put a microphone on him, we'd have to address him as Mr. President. So, and that was to watch Michael Sheen and Frank Langella together, and they had just done the stage version. They were the most rehearsed actors I've ever seen, because they'd done it on stage up in New York for a period of time, and they only ever flubbed their lines once, and it was both in the same scene too. So yeah, I mean, I'm getting excited listening to just recounting the stories of being on set, to watch performance, and when I worked with Kenneth Branagh on Thor, I can remember as a 19-year-old in Belfast on his first TV show, and I'm the lowest of the low on the totem pole in the sound department. Kind of just it was amazing to watch somebody who spoke in a British accent, English accent, who would then go on set and speak in a perfect Belfast accent, because he was originally born in Belfast. And I don't know if you've seen the movie Belfast that he directed. Yeah. So
wonderful film. I loved Belfast. Well, I mean, you've worked on so many different different films, and what a career that you've had. Could you ever have imagined, back seeing Jaws in the theater back in Belfast, that you would have had not just come to Hollywood but work with? I mean, you've worked with everybody. Even the cast of Bullet Train is half the cast of Hollywood. It's just, I mean,
Yeah, and we shot that during the height of the pandemic as well.
yeah.
So that was not easy. My kudos to my team of David Raymond, who literally almost had a surgical gown on, goggles, mask, on a train, trying to boom that. But yeah, but I have to mention, you're talking about that kind of being back in Belfast from watching movies. I can, remember watching, and the joy of watching Christopher Reeve fly for the first time Superman, sitting in the West End in London, watching John Carpenter's The Thing, and just that blew my mind. To then interviewing Tommy Causey, who was the production mixer on The Thing, and who also he did Big Trouble in Little China and Halloween. He was John Carpenter's mixer. So that I've been very fortunate in the people that I've met and the opportunities that have been given to me, and it was I did a letter writing campaign when I worked at the BBC, because I was trying to figure out how to get into movies. I wrote to Clint Eastwood, I wrote to Steven Spielberg, all trying to visit the set. So if you can imagine, I'm in Belfast, I'm working in radio, television, music shows, current affairs, going out doing documentaries, but also writing to say, hey, are there any job opportunities? Is it possible to visit the set? And I wrote to Michael Mann, who was he was writing the television, producing the series Miami Vice.
Yeah.
So this was 1987, and it was number one on the BBC at the time. And I just couldn't get over these two cool detectives, these hip detectives, Crockett and Tubbs, the cinematography, the music. And I wrote to Michael Mann saying, dear Mr. Mann, would it be possible to visit the set of Miami Vice? And within about 2 months, I got a letter. I think it was actually a month. I got a letter back inviting me to the set of Miami Vice and to post-production at Universal Studios. So that letter to Michael Mann is why I'm here right now. That opened the door for me to get into the industry in the US. So,
by the way, I just want to point out, kids watching at home, that doesn't always happen. You might write your favorite director, and that doesn't mean you're going to get invited to the set of Miami Vice. That's really cool that he did that. Did you go?
Yes. I went. I went in the summer of 1987, and I can remember going to the set and an assistant director coming up to me saying, don't talk to the actors. Don't talk to the actors. I'm like, I want to see the sound crew. That's who I want to meet. And it was a mixer called Joe Foglia, and it was his boom operator, Scott Blender, and his utility, Vince Nuccio, who were kind enough to kind of show me the equipment that they were using. And I just couldn't get over the, Panavision cameras, the cranes, the Testarossa. There's Don Johnson. There's a guy that looks like Don Johnson. No, that's his double, and all the directors, producers' chairs, director chair. I mean, it was big budget. And then I spent 3 days with them, went to Los Angeles, and I sat in with the editing crew as they were watching the rushes or the dailies from the show. And then I got invited to the scoring stage for The Crime Story.
Wow.
And that's where Michael Mann was working. He was in Vegas. So I never got to meet him, but I left a bottle of Bushmills whiskey on his desk with a little thank you note. And I went back to Belfast and thought, I've got to figure out how to work in the States. I want to work in the movies. I want to work in television. And about 6 months later, I got a call from the production mixer, Joe Foglia, on the show, who was still working on the show, and said, if you're interested, my company's small, but I do Miami Vice 9 months of the year. There's nobody here to do other work, commercials, industrials. Would you be interested in, coming out and doing that work? And I went to my boss at the BBC and asked him if it would be possible to take a year's leave of absence in case it didn't work out. And he said, no, if you leave, that's it. So I left in Christmas of 87 and went to Miami. And worked for Joe's company for a couple of years, and then went independent, and eventually moved out to LA in 2002.
That's
So, but
amazing.
and I got to meet Michael Mann. I got to meet him because many years later, I interviewed for Miami Vice, the movie, the
Yeah,
Colin Farrell, Jamie Foxx one. And, when I went into the interview, I said, Mr. Mann, you and I actually have a connection because many years ago, I asked to visit the set of Miami Vice, and here's the letter you sent to me. And then that took our interview in a whole other direction. So, and I got offered the job, but I had to pass on it because the date kept pushing as to the start date. Start date kept pushing. And so I wasn't able to do it. So, and another production mixer, David Ronnie. But to sit across from Michael Mann and tell him that, I'm basically here because of your kindness, because of you answering that letter to a kid from Belfast in 1987. So it's 2023. I can't believe it sometimes.
but that's incredible. I mean, this is a great. I'm so glad you told these stories because this is a very different. I mean, it shows what perseverance can do, and of course you have to be good at your job, obviously. So, but it's amazing that you were able to go, like you said, go from Belfast all the way out. I mean, I don't know if that would even happen today. I don't know if somebody would write a letter to a director, and if a director, I mean, with social media, it's easier to get to people. But back then, you had to put pen to paper and then write something, and then he had to have read it. A lot of the time, assistants read it. The director never answers. You never get. I mean, hell, I get emails from people I want to answer, and I forget to answer them.
I try to answer all my emails because I have a copy of a letter that I wrote to Clint Eastwood in like 1985. They read it. Oh my God, I can't believe it. So, dear Mr. Eastwood, would it be possible to visit your set of your film?
Well, before I let you go, what advice can you give to people who are the great thing about learning nowadays, whether you're talking on YouTube or whether you're working on a film or a television show or recording music, I mean, the idea of understanding the dynamics of sound and how voices interact with microphones and all that, the science of all of that is not going to change. What can you recommend? Where can people start if they want to get into this profession?
There is so much information online now today that back in 1981, I went to the library and got a book on sound recording techniques. And that is what I used in my first interview. So the resources that are available online, even the podcast that I did for the CAS with some of the greatest production mixers here in Hollywood, is amazing. The stories that they tell from working back in the 60s and 70s right through to today. So, there are a lot more colleges and schools that offer courses. It's a lot easier to reach out to people. What the Academy runs a Gold program. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And the museum is offering workshops. Just 2 weeks ago, they did a Foley workshop. There is stuff to be getting at. I mean, you can go online and do a course on cinematography or directing. Everybody seems to be offering courses these days. So there is no shortage, but it's perseverance or being able to kind of make a connection. I just had an email from a young man in the west of Ireland who's at a college there, and he was, I don't know how he found my email, but he just wanted to ask me for some advice. He's doing a 3-minute piece from Black Panther, and they're basically having to rebuild the soundtrack from scratch. So
Wow.
it's great to be able to talk to him about when it comes to recording, because they're redoing the dialogue as part of the class.
Right.
And this is what I would do if you're doing, poor man's ADR, trying to match what we do in production. You can't have the perspective forced too close. So, but no, it's great. There's just, as I say, no shortage of the ability of anybody to kind of find what it is that they want to do in this business. And as long as they're willing to put in the hard work.
Well, that's great advice. Well, Peter Devlin, this is so great to have spoken to you today. I've never talked with anyone in sound, and this has been a real treat. And your stories are great. I mean, you've worked with everybody, and your filmography is incredible. And
Well, we could talk for another hour. Sound is, you talk to me about just the importance of sound. It is such it affects us on such an emotional level. And recently I went to see, and I'd never seen this in the big screen, Lawrence of Arabia by David Lean. And I saw it over at the Academy Museum,
oh,
and it was 70 millimeter and 6-track. The theater was filled of all ages, which was fabulous.
yeah,
And all I could think about was that poor production sound crew in 120-degree heat in 1962, with probably the simplest of equipment. And the production mixer, his name was Paddy Cunningham, and he did many of David Lean's films, and it won the Academy Award. But back then, it wasn't the team it wasn't people that actually did the work that accepted the Oscar. It was actually the person that ran the sound department back in London got the award. Yeah. So, but going to see that film on the big screen gave me hope for the fact that cinema is still alive and well. The fact that you got an audience in the middle of a week to see that on the big screen and to hear it in 6-track was phenomenal. And I wasn't hearing it in Atmos, just 6-track, and it's still connected. It still had, such an impact. Amazing. And that's why I still love going to the movies.
I do too. I mean, it's just the quality of cinema. We just need to get those stories. I don't think they could even make Lawrence of Arabia today. It would never be the same movie. You'd see all those big wide shots, the battle sequences. It would all be CG. It would, when you're watching Lawrence of Arabia, that what you're seeing, it was there. They had to have it. Some of those shots in the desert, the cameras are like half a mile back, and you're looking at these giant tableaus. I watched it recently myself, and it's incredible. That's what movies are.
And then I don't know if you know that David Lean, when he did Ryan's Daughter, which he shot over in the west of Ireland, that the reviews were so bad in that film, he gave up production. He said, "That's it, I'm done."
Yeah.
Which is what would it be like today? I mean, when you, as a filmmaker, it's so tough because everybody's a critic, and if you can go online, you'll get hammered somewhere. So, and to think that we were robbed of David Lean making films as a result of some snarky reviews somewhere.
I know, and it's true. And you have to remember how much, because people, when they watch a movie for 2 hours, they take it for granted. Somebody might have worked on it literally for, like Martin Scorsese wanted to make Gangs in New York for 20 years. It took him 20 years to get it made. So you just never know. Well, Peter, this has been so much fun speaking with you. You've got great stories, and I know you can't tell us what Marvel movie you're working on next, but I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of the Marvel Universe. Let's say I'm rolling. I won't say it, but I'm rolling through my Rolodex of my mind. I think Captain America New World Order is already shooting. So what comes after that? But it's good to be involved with Marvel. I mean, it's and you've been doing it for a while. I mean, you go back Thor. You're OG. Thor was one of the foundational films working with Kenneth Branagh. I mean, and he it's funny. I always wondered, would we believe that the Iron Man, that Thor, and that Captain America would all work? If that didn't work, if audiences didn't believe in those three movies, there never would be an Avengers. So it was pretty amazing. It was such a great move on their part to get Kenneth Branagh to direct Thor. I think that's one of the great moves in cinema history, when Kevin Feige's like, okay. And before that, he did Cinderella, the live-action Cinderella. Or maybe he did that after. I think he might have done it right before. So he was already in with Disney, so it was smart. And that was before Disney even owned the MCU. I think it was pretty.
And then I date back to Daredevil, which at that time was a kind of Fox property.
Which is crazy because Jon Favreau was in that, and then he ends up directing Spider-Man. I mean Spider-Man, Iron Man. and incredible. I really like that movie, the director's cut of Daredevil. I really enjoy. I think
I know it's 20 years, and I think Mark Steven Johnson just was interviewed recently about it, though. And I have a 14-year-old, so I think maybe it's time to revisit the director's cut myself.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I like it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a fan. I thought Ben Affleck did a great job, and now we're going to see him play Batman in The Flash again. So that's crazy.
In a Flash, yeah.
Well, listen, sir, Peter, it was so great to have you. Peter Devlin, it was so great to have you here on the Designing Hollywood podcast.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to our very impressive sponsor, Costumes Rental Corporation. The variety of costumes at Costumes Rental Corporation is expansive. CRC is recognized worldwide as the premier supplier of military and police costume uniform rentals. Costumes Rental Corporation takes pride in its commitment to each customer, helping to produce the type of exceptional look needed for a successful production. A special thank you to founder and executive producer Martika Ibarra, co-founder, costume designer, the legendary Marilyn Vance, and of course, John Campea from The John Campea Show. Our technical director is Taylor Gonzalez. Thank you to all of our viewers for tuning in, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Tune in to the audio version wherever you listen to podcasts. I am, of course, your host, Robert Meyer Burnett, and you can find me on Instagram at rmburnett, or find me on Twitter at BurnettRM, or on YouTube at PostGeek Singularity. Thanks very much. Like, subscribe, and give us your comments. What would you like to see on the channel? Right down below. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of Designing Hollywood.